She's a resident of McDowell.
Tracy.
Apparently.
I really liked your remarks today.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
That was very appropriate.
She meant a lot to me.
I think Tracy's coming.
It's meant a lot to all of
Steal
us.
that chair.
We need
I
another.
think just chair for Tracy, but she can sit.
Move that.
I was gonna say, roll around this way.
Okay,
Do we have space? Or
Oh,
do we
we'll
need
just
to
put
move
it,
Jared?
we'll put it right next to you.
So-
Oh, Jerry, you don't have to do
You
that.
want it over there?
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Rick, you know, we were all just in a very unusual day. Of course, you know, a lot of us were out at Lisa's memorial service. And then when I was driving out there, I get a call from Rick saying that he was having a kidney stone attack. Wouldn't be able to make it to Lisa's celebration. He said, but don't worry, I'm gonna go. I called my doctor. He said to go to the emergency department, and then after I leave there, I'll come to the board meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I said, Rick, no.
Tough guy.
He said, no, they'll give me some meds and stuff and I'll be all right. I said, Rick, go home after that. Go home. So about the third time of me telling him that, he finally said, well, okay. So we had to juggle a bunch of proxies. He had proxies for people. He had to give a proxy. I'm not even really sure who's gonna run the board meeting. Are you the?
I think I am. Vice chair.
Congratulations,
That's
Michael.
right, Michael.
Congratulations. I'm just setting
You're
the
gonna run
stage
the
for
board
you.
meeting.
That's right.
Michael, I'm setting the stage for you.
Okay.
That's for you.
Don't let it go to your head.
Trust me. I'll gladly hand those reins back.
So we have,
It's a challenge, Ira.
you know, the schedule and all of our proceedings are pretty unusual today, but I'm sure everybody can appreciate that, so. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, welcome everyone. First we'll approve the agenda and then through the prior meeting minutes. Ira, I believe you and I are the only voting folks with our proxies.
Oh, okay.
You got a fistful of proxies.
So
Then I'll
do
move to,
you have a motion on the approval of the agenda?
yeah, I'll move to approve the agenda and, sure.
And I'll second that. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
And the ayes have it. Prior meeting minutes from August 24th. Have a motion?
Move to approve, on behalf of Ronnie Beal, he attended those.
Okay. Have a motion, I'll second that. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Next we have a report from our CEO, Brian Ingram. Mr. Ingram.
Everybody's already had a chance to meet Clark, right? I'm hoping you got a
Yes.
wonderful introduction in the finance committee.
I did.
And your speech went well to the group?
It was rather short,
We
but
let him off the hook because we heard you do it in the board meeting.
Okay, all right. Let's see. One question that has been looming with the release of the secretary's plan, and again, let's remember that with all due respect to the secretary, she can have all kinds of great plans, but is not in a position to be able to implement a lot of things without proper legislation and approval from the General Assembly. And if you just kind of step back from North Carolina, I was explaining this to Clark earlier today, you know, essentially you have three big drivers. You have the governor, and through the governor, the secretary, and those divisions of Medicaid and mental health, IDD and SU. And you have the General Assembly, and you have the House, and you have the Senate. And honestly, by far the most influential group of those three has been the Senate. So there's been a lot of question about how the General Assembly would address the Secretary's plan. it requires for her to implement or execute many of the things that are part of that plan, requires an amended 1115 waiver, some pretty substantial changes to existing legislation, new legislation. I mean, this is heavy timber, as we say in the North 40, right, Jay? So, people were hoping, if you were on the DHHS side of it, they were hoping that in this special called session in October, when it begins October 4th, that they would be able to muster up enough juice to get things done. No one believes that's going to happen in October. DHHS doesn't. All our intelligence from the General Assembly has been very consistent that they won't be taking up any Medicaid business. They won't be taking up the, House Bill 403, all the big rigmarole over Cardinal, CEO, board, that turned into an enormous kind of Christmas tree bill. It started really a couple of years ago. Not going to take that up. So we're kind of on ice a little bit. And a good question that you might ask is, so what happens to the Secretary's timeline given all of that? And it is a very good question. I would say that it just becomes extremely unlikely that she would be able to move at the pace that she anticipates. And that it would be absolute beyond bold, suicidal for them to really go ahead. Now, they could go ahead and do some things with the expectation of approval from CMS, with the expectation of approval from the General Assembly, and they could just kind of sail the ship out there. And that just seems politically extremely risky, although they have indicated that they would be willing to do that. My opinion is that when it comes down to it, that they would not. And that this means that things are going to be set back. The most aggressive, I think, the most possible scenario is that the procurement for the physical health part of managed care be in the spring. That is the one they are really trying to hang their hat on. We really want to have that procurement in the spring, and we didn't make a copy of the, I guess we handed it out last time, we have that infographic, which is really the best way to try to understand all these milestones. The possibility that they would have the procurement for the tailored plans at that same time, I think is almost impossible, virtually impossible, again, because of what they need to get from CMS and then what they need to get legislatively, because the law is still that existing law, 372 or whatever the session law is, the Medicaid Transformation Act, which we have another infographic for, which is a lot different, has much less detail than the managed care plan that the Secretary had, and much different timing. And we'll see. That hasn't stopped everyone from clamoring about and trying to get themselves in the best possible position because, is it possible that the procurement could be in the spring? Yes, possible. Seems very unlikely. But, nevertheless, you have to, I suppose, be at least ready for that. So, other than that, things have been fairly quiet. And I think, unless you have any questions on that, it's probably time to go into closed session.
We will then go into closed session pursuant to General Statute 143-318-11, A1, in order to prevent a disclosure of competitive healthcare information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C, 126.1. Board not consider the public record without reading of Chapter 132, the general statutes, and to consult with attorneys pursuant to the statute 143, 318, 11A. Do I have a motion to that effect?
Sure, Ronnie Gill would make that motion.
Okay. And I'll second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And, so
Well, we went to his first funeral.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't believe that.
You guys ready to start out?
call this meeting to order. Please continue eating, and if you need to get up and refresh your plate or anything like that, please feel free to do so. Rick French has had a medical issue this afternoon he's having to attend to.
After the third time of me telling him, go home, don't come to the board meeting, he kindly accepted my judgment on that.
So, at any rate, I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. Public, do we have anyone signed up for public? Or let me call the roll first, I'm sorry. Okay. And I apologize, this is my first time for subbing for Rick, he's always here. Ryan, can you tell me, do I need to check these off, or
I'll take care of
you take
that.
care of
That's just
it?
for your record.
Okay. Nancy Baker.
Here.
Ronnie Beal, I think Ira Dunn has his proxy. Gary Blevins.
I'm here.
Thank you. Richard, pardon my, Bunyo. Okay. Jack Cobb.
Here.
Ira Dunn is here. Gene Duncan. Not here. Joyce Edwards.
Here.
Rick French is not here, and Ira, do you have his, who has his proxy? Sorry, Nancy has his proxy. Dr. Heck?
Yep.
Pam Holcomb, I have her proxy tonight. Jim Holland?
Here.
Jude Johansson?
Here.
Billy Kennedy? And he's not, oh, Dr. Cobb, I believe you have his proxy.
He was supposed to call in, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Don't believe he's on the line, but we've got here listed that he sent in something to give you his
Excellent.
proxy. Okay. Michael Ladner, that's me here. Pat McGinnis.
Here.
Mike Norris.
Here.
Thank you. Marsh Pittman.
I have his proxy.
Ira Dunn has his proxy. Steve Smith. Rick French is not here. Let's see. Okay, that's the full one at the top. Okay, I'm sorry. I think we've got everyone here then. Public comment. We have 2 people signed up for public comment. Let's take them in the order they signed up. Mary Short. Ms. Short, if you'd like to step up and begin, please. Public comments limited to 5 minutes per person.
Hi, Mary Short, Katie Short, Alexander County. Katie is on the Innovations Waiver. So we went to the regulatory blah, blah, blah committee. And apparently it was time for the quarterly complaints and grievances summary. And I think it's been a couple of quarters since I made a remark about this. And my remark, the last time I made a remark about this quarterly grievance summary has to do with the Table 3 rate per 1,000 individuals served. And at that time, my recollection is I complained about the fact that the rate per 1,000 for IDD was up at 10%. I guess that's what this rate is. But for mental health, it's like 3%, and then for substance abuse, it jumps a lot. But it's still, the highest it is 2.5%. And it seems to me, my remark last time I spoke to this was that the IDD percentage of per 1,000 served, it was at about a 10% rate. And I was shocked that you all were happy that the IDD rate was 10% per 1,000, and that didn't seem to concern you if mental health was only 3% and substance abuse is 2%. Don't you think you ought to care about what's happening at the IDD end of this business? Whatever. So now, gosh, we have a 13.5% back in July and September that at the committee I heard was blamed on the resource allocation letters. But then in January and March, it was 12.5%. But that appears to be all IDD care coordination complaints. So I don't know why you are all so happy with this rate per 1,000 of IDD being 4 times the mental health grievance rate. I mean, I just think as a board, you'd want to know why it's 4 times per 1,000 served. That's a big deal. But my opinion, just talking to y'all at public comment. Thanks for playing along. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Short. Next person signed up is Jerry Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We want to pass our condolences on to Miss Lisa Fletcher. That was very, very sad. Very nice lady. Comment about school. I would like to save you some money because we need it for services, right? I'm going to tell you a way to save, and we need some hound dogs on it. We need somebody, a pit bulldog. We don't need somebody that ain't got a backbone. So we need your lawyer. You know, lawyers got backbone. Now, here it is. In the mental health profession in school, you've got a program here in Ashford, Bunker County, called OASIS program. That's an example. We got many of them across our catchment area. These programs, for a kid to be entering into this program, the parents in the school system has to sign them out and sign them in to this program. The school provides a teacher or 2, one regular, one special ed. And this is the way it works. Now, if a parent signs them out of their program in school and put them into this program, then there's something specific about that. Where does the money come from that takes care of these kids? Okay, mental health here, you all provide a very large sum of money to all these children to get these services. I'm not complaining about the ones that needs it and is supposed to have it. What I want to bring to your attention, the school system has a legal responsibility to provide the services to children under IDEA law. Your attorney is well aware of this. And under that law, they're supposed to work with these kids to get them identified under the 24 categories that the state of North Carolina provides under DPI. Now, once they're identified and they need this mental health service, then there's where the parents make a decision whether to put them in this program or not. So what I want you to seek out, and I've already talked to Buncombe County Superintendent about it, is that there are children that's in this program that are not identified. And I have one specific one that I'm working with right now in the 4th grade, and he's already spent a year down there. And he's not identified. So this creates a serious problem financially for you all. It's taking money out of your pocket that you could be providing services to other folks that really needs that service before the identification kicks in. So I'm not complaining about the ones that are identified and the parents wants to do this. I'm talking about the ones that are not. So I think you can get more specific information from your staff that deals with this stuff. So look at the dollars. I'd like to see and talk about this because it's big. And we do need services in school, but the school is responsible for things that we don't need to be taking money out of this pot. Let the school deal with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. That's all that's signed up on the sheet for public comment. So we'll move on now. Before we get into the meeting, one introduction and one other thing. Jerry referenced Letha Slusher. For those who may not have been on the board very long, Ms. Slusher was our former finance director who retired a few years ago. Has it been
Three.
Three. And Ms. Slusher had a recent bout with cancer and had died, and staff, in fact, reason for the change in meeting time, staff was at her funeral this afternoon. So we want to send our condolences to the family. And Brian, if you would, we have an introduction to make also.
I think as many of you know, despite our pleasure with having Jennifer's services, that we've been searching for a full-time, on-the-ground CFO, and we finally found one. And that is Clark Phillip. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on Clark and tell you a little story about how impressed we were with him. And then, you know, he's got a 5 or 10 minute speech, I think, that he wants to deliver. So we'll capture your attention with that, I'm sure. He has his bachelor's degree in business administration and a major in accounting. He's a CPA. And most recently, he was the vice president of finance and analytics for Molina Healthcare of South Carolina, which is a similar size program to ours. You know, he's had a lot of experience, probably a 20 or so year track record in executive finance positions with health plans. We used a recruiting firm and actually had 3 finalists selected to come and do on-the-ground interviews with us. Clark was first, and I sat with Christina and Tracy and talked to some of the other staff the night he left, and we all kind of said, gee, do you think anybody could be better than Clark? And we called and really got down to business with him, and he accepted our offer, and we told the other 2 candidates, thank you, but you don't need to get on that airplane. So that's how impressed we were with the kind of gentleman he presents himself to be. So Clark, welcome aboard, and any great words of wisdom you have for the board, have at it.
Well, I'm very, very pleased to be associated with this organization. I've been impressed with the management team here at Vaya, and I'm looking forward to not only a relationship with being part of this team, but also learning a great deal more about the mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, and developmental disabilities part of the business, which I haven't delved into in great detail, and primarily the fiscal side of the business, but I have a lot of experience in the risk and the payments and all that sort of thing that go with that. So this is a great opportunity, and if you can't live in Charleston, Asheville is a wonderful alternative. So I'm looking forward to. My wife is excited about being here, and we just look forward to this. It's a tremendous opportunity.
And I think he's the only guy we have on the staff that I know of from Oklahoma, right? Do you have any other Okies, Christine, that you know of?
I don't know for sure, but we can make you a special one.
Quite a distinction.
I did see a guy in the hotel parking lot that had an Oklahoma State football shirt on.
They're
Yeah,
around.
visitors come through, I suppose.
Okay. Thank you, Brian, and welcome. Okay, if you would please take another quick look at the agenda and the prior meeting minutes, and I'll await a motion for approval on those. Okay, have a motion on both items, and second from Dr. Khan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Ms. Hayes, if you would, please review the conflict of interest disclosure.
Sure. No board member has brought to my attention a view of potential conflict of interest, but now is your opportunity to do so if you have not had the opportunity to speak with me before the meeting. Hearing no conflicts reported, we can move on.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is board resolution regarding power of attorney.
Do they all have a copy of the resolution? No.
Okay. Okay. We have a page and a half document here. If it pleases the board, we'll let Tracy give the background on this and then summarize what it is. If you want it in its entirety, I'll be happy to do that. But I'll let her do her explanation and so forth first.
Sure. We've had a couple of instances over the past few months where we needed Mr. French's signature on documents. Of course, Rick is located in Alexander County, and that can sometimes be challenging for us. It's usually very routine things, but waiting to be able to catch up with him or arrange for signatures. The most recent one was getting our two vehicles that we own, the two maintenance trucks that we own, re-registered. The county, for whatever reason, decided, although in years past they had always been fine with the CEO's signature, that they wanted the board chair signature. And so we looked at different options and talked with Rick about preparing just a very limited power of attorney that would clarify that in the event that Rick is not available, either Brian or Jay or myself could sign some of these types of legal documents so that we can move forward without having to wait for his signature. And so just to make it clean, we wanted to get a resolution from the board of directors supporting that power of attorney document.
And the limited areas in which it covers, do you want to review those?
Sure, it's just property transactions, so real property or other property, meaning the vehicles, or insurance transactions. So those are the types of areas where we would potentially, again, it's only been a couple of times recently where we've had requests for our board chair signature as opposed to our CEO's signature, so we're just trying to make life a little bit easier for everybody.
Does anyone have any questions? Do you want me to read the full resolution, or is her explanation enough for you?
Good.
Okay. With that, then I wait a motion for approval of the, I will read the title of the resolution of the Board of Directors of Vaya Health to approve the establishment of a limited power of attorney for the chair of the Board of Directors of Vaya Health. I have a motion to approve that. Pat made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's Joyce French, listen to me. Having a senior moment here, Joyce, I'm sorry, Joyce Edwards.
We only go back.
I'll try not to. Do what?
I said, we only go back how far now?
It's senior moment, I'm not used to sitting in this chair. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. Next, we have the report of the chair. Mr. French isn't here, of course. Pinehurst Conference, I'm going to ask, if he doesn't mind, Brian Ingram to cover conference information.
Well, we always invite board members to attend that conference, which is the first week in December, right? The exact dates is, and if anybody's interested in, if anybody's interested in attending, I guess you could probably speak to Ryan. And it does fill up really fast, and the issue becomes hotel accommodations. So if you do want to go, and you know you want to go, let Ryan know so we can get the reservation made so you can be on campus, so to speak. Wow. It's a good conference.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on, Mr. Ingram. think one of those tasks we were going to do here was to introduce our new CFO, but you've done that, so I guess. we
Saving
move to-
saving time on the agenda, that's always good.
The legislative and DHA.
Sure.
Take this on this.
Well, last month we spoke at least a little bit about the Secretary's plan that has been released on essentially managed care, Medicaid transformation, and you've kind of her view of how that could be implemented with some amount of detail and not full detail. And actually, I missed the meeting with the Secretary. Ooh, forgot to mention this. Unfortunately, we have our team captain, our Blue Ridge Relay team captain, Donald Bruce here. We did successfully complete the 208-mile Blue Ridge Relay in just a little over 32 hours, finishing 155th out of about 200 teams. And I'll tell you, if you want to do something tough, you just sign up for that next year. So we had a Vaya sponsored team. We have a fantastic video. I think it's on our Facebook page.
Yes.
And a lot of photographs. And wow, what a great thing to tackle. So very proud about that. And only disappointed that Dr. Heck didn't join our effort. So next year. There was a meeting with the Secretary, and she conducted some discussions about it. It was actually followed with another meeting that was on a Friday, and that was when we were doing the race, and then on Monday, another meeting. So there's been some FaceTime with the leadership in the department. This was our short attempt at trying to offer recommendations on how that plan could be improved. And to tell you the truth, you just kind of have to decide how many things you're going to try to put in a letter or in a set of recommendations. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to explain this. All of what the Secretary has proposed, she does not have the authority to implement, right? I mean, when you get right down to it, with all due respect to her office, we'll say, there's limited, they have limited power and authority, and so much of this lies in the hands of the General Assembly, because that's how state government works. And I think, what we've seen over the last few years anyway, is that the General Assembly has taken, a larger and larger and larger role in public policy and legislation around healthcare. It seems to be more driven, quite honestly, by the Senate than the House, or even probably the governor's office, or the secretary's office. I mean, that's just the reality of how things work in government and politics. So while she has that plan, much of it requires some very significant legislation, a lot of political conflict over, especially how the behavioral health piece will work out, such that there's been a lot of interest in what the General Assembly's response is going to be to that, and when they would be taking up the whole business of Medicaid, the 1115 waiver, the procurement of those contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And that the department was very interested in, they had a last-ditch effort. You remember we talked about this a little bit at the end of this session that didn't go anywhere, and then they thought, well, maybe in the October special session, they would really try to put a big push on and get some work done there that would propel the whole plan forward and at least start to get people going in the right direction with it. But it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case. So it really, I think, calls into question the timing of a lot of what the Secretary anticipates doing. And of course, there is the issue of CMS approving the waiver and the state's interest in submitting amendments to the waiver. So I guess what I'm sharing with you is my view that a lot of this is going to just get backed up. It just doesn't seem any way that things could happen in the way that the Secretary had proposed in her plan and how it's reflected in your most recent infographic. But it still is possible. So there could be a procurement of contracts for the management of physical health in the spring. In the meeting that I was at, I asked specifically, that was Dave Richard, the Medicaid Director, Deputy Secretary, if they thought that absent approval from CMS for the 1115 waiver, if they would still go ahead and do the procurement for the physical health plans, and he said yes. To which I thought, we'll see. I think that would be a very risky endeavor politically because it presumes so much that it would be very difficult to do. But all that, I guess we'll say, kind of wait and see, and things are a little bit on ice right now. Any questions about any of that? I think mostly the October session is going to be housekeeping at best. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. When members know that there isn't going to be a lot of important legislative action, they're not really inclined to go, and then that makes it hard for them to get anything done. So it's probably not a real effective session. But in the short session, which will begin in early spring, it is going to be heavy on Medicaid, 1115, the whole role of LME NCOs and all of this going forward. It'll be a major piece of work that needs to get done. So, any questions?
Brian, I'm interested in this space. I mean, this has been such a huge goal. I guess I'm curious about your insights. Why this is moving slow at this stage, and you think they would be against the decision pretty quickly?
New secretary, new governor, secretary who, has to make some changes in the 1115 waiver. We have a lot of conflict in the General Assembly about what to do and how to do it and who to do it with and how many to do it with. So without, again, it kind of comes back to, the secretary can have the greatest plans in the world if she doesn't have the authority to take action and execute, because it's absent the legislation that's needed, nothing happens. So a great deal of this is under the control of the General Assembly, and they aren't ready to take it up yet. I think that's really what it amounts to. Now, we'll see what happens in the spring. But what we do have is the existing legislation. And again, that's back to the old infographic where, it's pretty vague about a lot of things. But that is the existing legislation around how the state would approach managed care. And it says nothing about basic plans or tailored plans. It's just a very broad brush plan that doesn't really say what is going to happen around the LME NCOs, for example, other than that we would continue in our role until, I think, 4 years after the execution of contracts for physical health management. So there's a huge amount that has to be filled in. Bottom line is there is not agreement on how to fill that in, nor is there the political congealing around that. So.
Any other questions?
Lamentations.
Yeah. I guess just in way of an update too, we think everybody, if you have a television set, a newspaper, or radio, or talk to anyone, understands that Blue Cross and Blue Shield and Mission Health have had quite a situation on their hands, haven't they? And that had a huge impact on our organization because we are so, I'll say, mission-centric around our needs for especially specialty care. I mean, you could argue that from a hospital inpatient perspective, maybe we could get away with, not dealing with mission hospitals, maybe, but, when we look at the utilization of our employees and their affiliates, family members, very, very, very dependent upon mission. So, not expecting there to be any magic around Blue Cross Blue Shield and Mission, being able to come to the table, or even trying to imagine there would be some way we would live for a couple of months and later something magical would happen. We had to find a new health plan. And, I said earlier, in finance, I think it's a combination of a little bit of luck. I mean, we did a lot of work to put ourselves in a position to have the luck, and worked out, what I think is all things considered, a great plan with United Healthcare. And that will be effective October 1st. It's just a major undertaking to do this in the middle of the year. And people work really hard to make it come true, or to, offer it, and to see there won't be some bumps for employees, but, we're good at, when we need to micromanage something, we can, and that's what we did with this, so.
Remind me how many employees that affects?
We have 407, we have
470
473, we have 473 people, employees. Not everyone actually enrolled, but a majority of them did. I don't know what the final count was. Enrollment stopped about a week and a half ago. So, and we, because of some very specific medical situations with people and some very specific questions that we really wanted to personally tend to, we have given a few people a little extra time to make the best decision for their health care. And that doesn't really hurt us. So.
All in all, it's probably at least as good and maybe a better plan, and save some money, so.
That's what it's all about.
That's right.
At least
So
for this
Brian,
year.
that decision is really affecting some of the rural counties around
It's
here.
huge.
It's huge, like in Franklin where I am. So there's no hospital then, access for anybody with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which most people have, quite honestly. Since,
That's why we had to
yeah,
change.
yeah. Since United Healthcare a while back said, go to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Because we're, a couple of years ago. Anyway, I'm glad that y'all figured out a solution. Here, I don't know what the rest of
Any other questions on that issue? Okay. That concludes the report of the Chief Executive Officer. Now I'll await a motion. I'll read this closed session. We're requesting is pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143, 318.11A1 in order to prevent the disclosure of competitive health care information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to NC General Statute 122C, 126.1, were not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes, or to consult with attorneys pursuant to NC General Statute 143, 318.11A3. Do I hear a motion that we go into closed session?
So moved.
A motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and second. Nancy and Pat. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes, so we'll now go into closed session. Jerry? Okay, we're back in open session. We next have a report of the Finance Committee, and that's with Chief Financial Officer Jennifer.
In the financial package, we have the financial reports. So the first one I'm going to talk about is document 1, which is the current ratio. In your package, you'll see that we have both the Medicaid current ratio as well as the total. So the total has Medicaid and non-Medicaid combined. Our goal is to have at least 1-to-1 for assets, current assets to current liabilities. As of July 17th for Medicaid, we're at 3.34, and in total, we're at 3.01. Both of those numbers improved compared to June. June is always a lower month because of year-end and holding open the books to record payables. So that trend is showing a downward trend when you look at it in total, and that is in part the impact of spending down cash related to fund balance replacing services because of the cuts in General Assembly. Any questions on the ratios? So the second document is the defensive interval. Again, these graphs are now presenting both Medicaid and in total. You can see the Medicaid defensive interval is at 90.88. We're required to have 30 days. We're at 90, which is 3 times as much. In total, we're also greater than 30 days, but it is only 70. So if you look at the 70 compared to 90, again, this is being driven by the fact that we are paying for services and not getting funding from the state on the non-Medicaid side. So again, that's a pretty big difference between the two, and it's something that we will continue to track. As with the current ratio, because of the reduction in cash, you can see that these are on a downward trend. Although, again, not as bad as June, because of June being year end and expenses being higher from trying to capture everything before the end of the year. The document number 3 is the medical loss ratio. We're required to spend at least 85% of our total capitation on services, and we are currently just above 89%. That is on an upward trend. Some of that is related to increasing costs of services on Medicaid. This ratio also includes some administrative costs. We changed some of our classification for the medical loss ratio to include our efforts that we are working on with population health, because it does benefit the Medicaid members. So that had a slight impact on the ratio, but not significantly. Most of this is actually being driven by increase in service costs. The fourth document is a new document in the package. We're going to work on simplifying this for next month. This is a consolidated income statement. It shows actual versus budget. It breaks everything down between Medicaid and non-Medicaid and shows you variances between the two. The format of it is to show revenue at the top, and then the service expense, which is our costs associated with delivering care, and then administrative expenses. So from a high-level perspective, for the month of July, we made $1.6 million, and that is at the bottom of the second page in the third column in. And that is, of course, compared to a budget, because of being government, we're supposed to be budgeted at 0. So we actually made more than we anticipated, and we also have not spent the fund balance appropriations that we anticipated. So back to the top of this document, you'll see that the first blue row total is total revenue before fund balance. We budgeted to make $32.6 million in revenue. We actually came in at 32.4. So that is slightly less than what we had budgeted. That is being driven mostly by Medicaid. Medicaid was $366,000 less than what we had budgeted. We are seeing a decrease in the membership compared to what we had budgeted. And again, that is something that we will continue to watch. Fund balance is the fund balance appropriation. For the current month, we had $1.3 million that is there, and that will only show up as budget. We will never have actual dollar amounts. That is a function of doing a balanced budget. In the service expenses, I'm going to go down to the next to last blue line and talk about it in total. So you can see for Medicaid, our total service expense was $23.1 million. We had budgeted 23.7. So we actually had less service expense in Medicaid than what we had budgeted, at $576,000. Some of that also has to do with we had fewer members. So some of that is directly related to that, but we did come under budget. Most of the variance of the $1.8 million for being off from service expense is coming from non-Medicaid. A lot of that has to do with timing. It relates to contracts being executed, invoices coming in, claims coming in, and that will increase over a period of time. So that's not expected to continue for a variance. The second page of the document has administrative expenses, and if you go to the first blue line that is on that, you can see, and again, on admin expenses, I like to look at those in total. The Medicaid versus non-Medicaid for admin is not as meaningful as it is on the service side. The actual expenses for administration were $3.1 million versus a budget of $4.4. One of the things that we changed in the current fiscal year, and this is the first time we've done it, is these documents are on full accrual basis. So there's a slight difference in how we're presenting the figures compared to previous time, and we'll be modifying some additional accruals. There are certain expenses that we have budgeted to be 1/12, so you'll see each showing up each month, but we won't actually have the expense until later in the year. So while it looks like we're running well better than budget, it is a factor of how the budget is created and we're into a brand new year. So some of those will continue to offset. But we ended up $1.3 million less than what we had budgeted. Most of this, again, is timing differences where costs are just not being incurred yet. There are a couple that I will point out that are not timing differences. One has to do with salaries, wages, and fringe. We had about a $300,000 difference on that. That is due in part to vacancies, and some of that also has to do with overtime. Overtime was switching people from salary to hourly based on the FLSA rules, and some of that has not moved into place yet. The effective date is that later than what we had budgeted. So there are some dollars that are being generated by that. The other thing that we have is there's $100,000 in rent for the current month. We overestimated the amount of rent, and we now have a better schedule of timing of when we will be leaving certain buildings and when the timing will come in of the rent for the Ridgefield space. So we know that that will be a, not just a one-time variance. And the risk reserve match contribution, that's the one that I'll say as an example. We're going to change the way we're handling that next month. Currently, it shows up as a variance. This is the $2.3 million that we will have to pay to the state in May or June. We have it budgeted to come over 1/12, but we won't actually pay it until the end of the year. We're going to start putting an expense in this to build up a liability so that we know when the end of the year comes that we're paying it, and it'll help even out some of the budget. So overall, we did end up with being under budget, and those will change again over the course of the year. Our total operating surplus was $1.7 million, as I mentioned, for the month of July. Any questions on that? So the next document is document 5. This is the graph that shows the difference between actual and budget for revenue. Relatively, all of these are in line. The revenue versus, actual versus budget is not significantly different, other than in the other and local. Other and local is where we budget the fund balance appropriation. Because it's only a budget figure and there'll never be actuals, that discrepancy between those two graphs will continue. Document 6 is medical services, Medicaid service budget. This shows again the detail of the costs for Medicaid. As I mentioned, we were under budget by $253,000 on Medicaid services. We are seeing some spikes and some offsetting decreases in costs. One of the things that we're looking at is PRTF has increased fairly significantly. We're seeing more children being admitted to PRTF, but then it's being offset by other services as well. So in total, we're still okay, but the variances between the types of service categories are stuff that we will be monitoring and working to either modify the budget or correct the actual expenses. Document 7 is the same information, just put into a graphical presentation. Those are for pictures. Document 8 is the pie chart that shows where the services are spent for Medicaid. Again, this stays pretty consistent. It really doesn't shift much from month to month. So nothing significant. More than half of our expenses are still going to ICFMR and innovations. Document 9 is the balance sheet. And I'm just going to highlight some of the differences here. Our assets went down by $812,000. Most of that is due to a decrease in cash. That is, again, us spending down money as we continue to do so throughout the year. Medicaid risk reserve, that increase is due to the state paying the 2%. Again, that always happens each month. The rest of the receivables and prepaids are timing differences based on whether or not we've received full capitation or getting things paid down. Within the liabilities, our liabilities changed by $1.3 million. The biggest change within that is under accounts payable. Accounts payable went down by $5.5 million. That has to do with June being year end, so we will have a much larger AP balance during that month than we will any other month of the year, because we hold the books open to try to capture as many expenses as we can. So once they're paid in July, then that number comes down. Accrued compensated absences is $1.7 million. This is an effect of us going to full accrual for presentation of the financial statements. This is a liability for what would be owed if everybody left or the company shut down. It's the cost of vacation payout. And IBNR fluctuates from month to month depending on the number of claims received versus the timing of when they actually get paid out. In the next section is the fund balance. There's a whole lot going on there, but I'm going to go to the second page. Fund balance increased by $485,000. That is being driven by the fact that we had a surplus on Medicaid of $680,000, non-Medicaid surplus of $992,000, and then the money we received from the risk reserve, which was $541,000. But because we recorded the liability for the compensated absences, vacation payout, that decreased fund balance by $1.7 million. So the net of that was $485,000. One of the things that we're doing differently this year for the fund balance is simplifying it. I know it doesn't look simplified here, but it will, because when June comes off, we won't have all the line items that we had last year. So last year we had line items for individual community reinvestment initiatives. This year they're more grouped into global categories. So if you look and you see where in July there's a dollar amount and there's a zero in June, that shows you how we've regrouped them differently. You'll also see that there's several items that have zeros in July compared to dollar amounts in June. Those were all of our community reinvestment initiatives that we had broken out into specific identifiable categories. Any questions on the balance sheet? So the last document is document 10, which is the cash flow statement. And again, as I mentioned, we had a decrease of cash of $1.3 million. We will continue to see cash decreasing over the year. And that, if there are no questions, is the end of the financial reports. We need another motion.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the action of the, on the financial report?
So moved.
Okay, the motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, yeah, just take a seat, take a choice. A motion and a second, any discussion? Not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Local budget revision.
Yes, we have our third budget revision for the current fiscal year. The majority of this revision is related to additional allocations that we received from the state. There were multiple allocations. It amounts to $1 million. So we are increasing what we are receiving for revenue by $1 million and increasing the amount of service expense. The additional dollars that are on here is about $42,000 rounded off. That's a reclassification associated with personnel expense, because some of the costs that we have are for staff associated with programs that are treated as service, like the GERO teams, system of care, housing. Those are all service expenses, and when we created the budget, the fund balance that was attributed to that was classified as admin, so this is a reclassification.
Okay, do I have a motion on the budget revision?
So moved.
Have a motion? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Now, the Regulatory and Finance Committee report is, Billy Kennedy's the chair of that, but he wasn't here today. Dr. Khan, would you feel comfortable giving us a report there?
That's why you all certified me as the vice chair, so I can do that.
There you go.
And I won't file a complaint that I only get 5 minutes and finance gets 15.
So noted.
You all received your packet that had the quality and the regulatory compliance information. First thing was a TCLI monthly report. There was also an annual report. The annual report first. Almost everything in the annual report for TCLI missed target. And it was color-coded so that things that hit target were green, targets were in blue, and things that missed target were in red. And you're just going to see a lot of red stuff there. And most of it even was comparison with the other LME MCOs, and they also missed target. But still, it didn't look very good. In the July report, there were different things being monitored. So in July, a lot of the things that were in the annual report for 16, 17 are not going to be brought forward. However, there were still some things that missed target. And you have a sort of a summary sheet for the July TCLI report. And you'll note that Vaya did not meet the housing standard. And the housing standard is a proposed super measure for fiscal year 17-18. Super measures come with a financial penalty when you don't hit them. $50,000 for DMH, and I think 100,000 for DMA or something like that, per month, per miss. Kind of scary stuff compared to my budget. So, so on the flip side of that, you will see the corrective actions that are being taken by Vaya. Most significant to me, there will be a dashboard so that housing can be tracked in real time, which was not available previously. So that should make the process more streamlined, more efficient, and hopefully make these numbers better. Brian Shuping is spearheading this effort. I did ask that whether or not the reduction in force and the subsequent reorganization for that branch was going to, whether they would be able to meet goals in spite of the reduction in force. And he was confident that they will. And in fact, Steve Kaczynski shared with us that the numbers in August are already looking better. And one of the other problems is that these numbers are very small. We're talking about maybe 6 placements per month. And so if you have 4, you're in big trouble. If you have 8, you look super good. And there's not a whole lot of difference there. But we are assured that the trend is upward and onward. The core performance measures you also have in your packet presented by Stephen Kaczynski. And there were no areas that were great outliers there. The compliance log and super measures were presented by Marvin Sanders. And on the good side, our external quality review, the comp results showed for the first time that we had scored a 92%, I think excellent, and 7% good. Basically, we were 99% to the good, which was far and above what we had done previously. The external review is no longer Mercer, it's a different company, but I don't think that's the reason we did much better. I think it's because we are learning to play the game. What's the name of the company doing our EQR?
Center for Medicaid Excellence, Medical Excellence.
Medical Excellence, yeah, it's a different than Mercer, but, so that was marvelous. We have to pat ourselves on the shoulder there. One of the problems, though, is that our tracking for these super measures is going to be based on data from claims from NC Tracks. And any of you who have ever had any experience with NC Tracks, right away have a chill to the heart when you do that. Their data is slow and inaccurate. So there will be instead internal tracking going on that is much more current and able to anticipate problems that are coming up and make changes before we hear anything about NC Tracks data, which sounds entirely appropriate to me and a very good plan. Access to care, quarterly report from Carla Mensa. Overall, we're doing excellent. One of the areas where we don't do as well, but we have very little control over, is the rate of that we're serving prison discharges. But there's probably no way that we can improve that number, because they're probably the least motivated group to participate with Vaya in follow-up. And they're also the hardest to track because they may be homeless, or they may not have a cell phone. They're basically going to be hard to track and to follow up with a particular problem. Grievance report from Stephanie Hoffman. The grievances are in line with what we saw previously. No big changes. The different areas where we track grievances are apples and oranges, and so there are a lot of variations in the percent that we see. Once again, numbers are very small, and so sometimes our statistical analysis is difficult. We don't want to say meaningless because people put so much work into it. But, for instance, there's a breakdown in your packet of grievances by county. They're all under 1%, but one case would change that. So very small numbers, but overall look good. And I'll entertain questions from people who diligently reviewed their packet and aren't satisfied.
Hearing none, Dr. Khan, thank you for that report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And next we have Pat McGinnis with the Consumer Family Advisory Committee report.
We had an interesting day on Monday, September the 11th. I was actually getting ready to go to the meeting when I got a call from Stacy, and Hurricane Irma was coming through, and some of the schools in some of our areas were dismissing early and this, that, and the other. So I really want to compliment not only our CFAC members for being able to do this change on short notice, but the staff. So we met our steering committee by telephone, and Nancy did a great job leading that call. And we talked about the Vaya financial review, we had local CFAC report outs, cross-functional team report outs, and Vaya board of directors updates, and the Person Center Plan project update, and we talked about our upcoming retreat and had a discussion about that, as well as the CFAC response to Medicaid proposed program design. We have a retreat scheduled for October the 27th and 28th at the Treatment Conference Center. We're going to talk about education and discussion of CFAC's roles and responsibilities, as well as the information flow between CFAC, Vaya, and the state. Our steering committee also discussed a 2018 focus on local CFAC member recruiting, retention, and succession planning. And we're going to also talk about these during our local meetings in October, because we feel like in many of our local areas, for instance, Alexander County is so different than Buncombe County that we want to tackle these issues on the local area before we do on the come together with them. The other thing interesting, once a month there's a state to local CFAC conference call. And I happen to be on it this month, and I don't participate every month on that, but when I can, I do. And I had made, there's a lot of uneasiness about the future of CFACs across the state since this 72-page report came out, because it did not specify that CFACs would live on. So I had said something about, well, you know, if we're offering value to each other, if we're offering value to the LME MCOs, and if we're offering value to our state leaders, then, you know, we might survive. But, you know, we have to be able to show that we have something to offer worth keeping. And I kind of said this on this call. And boy, did I misdirect this call. We were halfway through the agenda. And I honestly believe, had there been this been an in-person meeting, that there would have been blood. It got very ugly. And some of the folks, I believe they were from the Charlotte area, it became a LME MCO bashing call. And I said, well, now, wait a minute. You know, if there's anything going on in our, I said, that may be true in y'all's areas, but our board of directors and Vaya, they've been nothing but supportive of our CFAC. If there's anything we've ever needed and asked for assistance with, they've been nothing but supportive. And if we have any deficiencies or things we need to work on, it may be because we as CFAC members need to work on them, not because the LME MCO has failed us. Well, I started a real ruckus. And it got very ugly, to the point that John told me at 5 o'clock in the morning, you need to get up, take you some medication so you can sleep, because I hadn't done nothing but toss and turn all night. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm still wired up, getting up and taking a bath. But, and I understand there were quite a few calls to Raleigh. But, you know, after I said that, then there was Ben, who spoke up for partners, and then there was the new leader for Alliance that says, well, Alliance is really good to us. But there's a lot of people scared, there's a lot of people disgusted, and, you know, I think they're realizing. And I really do believe we have to have something of value to offer, not only the board and the area, but, you know, there's some things that all the CFACs could work on, but well, did we have it was like a knockdown drag out over the phone, and I don't usually share things like that, but that was the oddest call in all the years I've been on CFAC that I've ever been on. But I did want y'all to know that, you know, if there's ways that you feel you can work with CFAC, I'd like to see it survive. I think the rest of us would like to see it survive, but some people are really worried that it may not. So if there's any way we can work together to make sure that it does survive, and if we need to broaden our horizons and do some things a little bit different, we're open to having discussions with any of you. So, anybody else, Nancy or Judy, want to say anything?
I agree with Pat. I've been in a couple of meetings with Cardinal, and I've actually had to bite my tongue and said a few things and got up and left. So it can get very nasty, and Cardinal CFAC lets you know really quickly that, you know, they are not supported, and they're told what to do and when to meet and what they can do. And I'm sorry, I'm too old to be told what I have to do, so it don't work with me.
One thing you may not know too, in this call, they did say that area plans to host the next event like we held in Asheville a year or so ago, and it will probably be in April. So that might be a humdinger to go to too, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll stay at home.
Pat, I've got a question. What is the 72-page report that you're talking about?
There was
Medicaid plan.
Okay,
Secretary's plan.
okay, I got you.
But there's been a lot, even at the state CFAC, there's been a lot of concerns about that report, that CFAC was not named in the report. And so, you know, some people are just now hearing about it, but, you know, some of us are starting to take some action or trying to figure out what actions to take. But, you know, and that doesn't mean we're going away, but it just doesn't mean that some people say that because we didn't get recognized, it might mean that. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Pat. Jean Duncan is not here, so we won't have unless, did she send
There's
a
a
report?
written document.
There's a written document. Does anyone have any questions about that report? Okay. And is there any other business?
I'd like,
neglect, I'm sorry, Nancy.
Oh, it's okay.
Mike, you still on the phone?
Yes.
Thank you for your help on the insurance stuff. I need to make a point of noting the great help that both you and Pam were in our scramble here on the insurance stuff, and I neglected to mention that before. I apologize, but I want to be sure to indicate that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. You're most welcome. We were glad to help. I'm just pleased that Vaya had such a favorable option because many employers did not have such a rosy alternative as you did.
Agreed.
Nancy?
I wanted to let Vaya know, or let the board know, I was invited to, haven't quite figured this one out yet, but I was invited to a men's breakfast. Enjoyed it, to needless to say. But our Sheriff Duncan from Buncombe County got up and was a keynote speaker. And I can't even begin to tell you how he praised Vaya and how he praised RHA for the work that RHA is doing in the jail system when the inmates come out of the jail, and for what he feels as financial support from Vaya for the drug crisis that we're having right now, and for Vaya stepping up to the plate to make sure that these kits are out there. He also talked about the mental health crisis that's going on, the cuts that Vaya are having to take. He was very well informed, very educated on the topic, and he must have spent 15 or 20 minutes praising this organization for the work that they're doing, and wanted to make sure that everybody in Buncombe County and the surrounding counties, and he had made the same talk in Raleigh. So that made me feel really good to come back and hear the praises that we got from the sheriff, that Buncombe County is going to be hard to replace when we lose this gentleman at the end of his term. It's very sad to see him leave. But health-wise, we know he has to step down. So it was very hard, but very good.
Any other comments before we adjourn?
Yeah, I want to say, Ron, are you on the opioid task force?
Yeah. See if it.
Opioid task force.
The governor's opioid task force?
Well, the past governor,
We don't have one now anymore.
not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I wanted to give you some input if you were, but
Okay, well, you know how to reach me regardless.
I will just say this. You're 42 more times likely to leave a hospital with opioids than you are one time on a pill. So for those of you that are working on that, you might be able to do something with that, I don't know, but it really kind of disturbed me.
Big problem.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion from Nancy, do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
You know, I was going to say that.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Well, I'm not.
yeah. I will hang it.
You're-